Hello, and welcome back to my cabin. My name is Rory Stevens, and I am one of the Varietal writers. Varietal is a group of writers from Vancouver, and we're basically a writer's commune. We have stories we write for ourselves, and we put up for people to read if they want for free on the website that's in our description. But what we're doing tonight is not reading my own stories, actually. What we're doing tonight is we are looking at the second half of Medusa's story. Of course, it's not Medusa's story, it's Perseus. But what happened last week, if you weren't watching, was we read a story about Hercules' sort of great-grandmother being turned into a cow, and then becoming a Pharaoh's wife, I guess, in Egypt. That ran a little shorter than I thought, and so we sort of took a vote from the chat, and chat decided they wanted to hear this story. And that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to finish our reading of the story of Perseus in his pursuit of the head of Medusa. So if you didn't tune in since last week or you've missed it, I do encourage you to go and see the first half. It's not very long. Everything is always tagged in the description, time tag, so if you want to jump to it. But if you don't want to do that, a quick summary of what happened in the story so far. Perseus is the son of a woman whose father was a king in a far-off land. And the father was given a warning that the son of his daughter, his grandson, would kill him. So he did what I guess was supposed to be the humane thing, which was he locked his daughter up for her entire life, or at least developmental life. In that time, I believe it was Jupiter who comes... No, what am I talking about? I'm sorry, I've gone blank. Hello, GS. On who it was that came down. Maybe it was Jupiter, and I'm just double guessing myself. Anyways, one of the gods came down, romanced this girl in the tower, and impregnated her, then left. When the king found out, he sent her off in a box to float over the ocean because he couldn't stand to kill her. And I guess he felt like it was more humane that she might drown or survive. Very strange sense of ethics in this story, because he is painted sympathetically, the king who does this. As chance would have it, the mother reaches another shore of another land, is taken in by some lonely old man on the shore, raises Perseus for a few years at least. The king of that land becomes aware of her beauty and tries to... I'm going a little gray here, but I believe that he believed that the problem would be in trying to acquire this woman was her son, Perseus. So he sort of entraps Perseus into something that he couldn't possibly satisfy, which was originally just finding horses, because they were poor, they couldn't get them. But Perseus is the one who proposes that if he's going to put a challenge forth for suitors, that they should retrieve the head of the Gorgon. Now, the Gorgon is this species of creature that Medusa is a part of, famously with the head of snakes. And so where we're going to pick up today is looking at the second half of the story, which we got to the point where Perseus had taken the charge to get the head. The goddess Athena and Mercury comes down. And, sorry, I have a genuine issue with names, so try not to judge me too harshly. Came down and sort of wished him well and sent him off with this sort of helm that would allow him to run across water because he couldn't get a boat, Perseus. So we saw him go to the Fates in the north. Well, not the Fates, the Grey Ladies, I think they're called, but I think essentially modern audiences would understand them as the Fates. And those people were where we left off, because basically he just needed to know a location. And as unprofessional as this, I realize I've left my water way too far away, so I'm going to deal with it now rather than later. One moment. There we go. We're back. Okay, so now that we've caught up, we will continue, because there is actually quite a bit left to cover, so I don't want to take too long here. Part 4, The Western Maidens. Oh, no, wait. These are the ones that we already looked at. Sorry, the book doesn't always open to the right page. Nope, this is the right ones. Okay. As for Perseus, he leaped again into the air, and the magic slippers bore him southward with the speed of the wind. That's right, it's slippers in this version. Very soon he left the frozen sea behind him and came to a sunny land where there were green forests and flowery meadows and hills and valleys, and at last a pleasant garden where were all kinds of blossoms and fruits. He knew that this was the famous Western land, for the Grey Sisters had told him what he should see there. So he alighted and walked among the trees until he came to the center of the garden. There he saw the 3 maidens of the West dancing around a tree, which was full of golden apples, and singing as they danced. For the wonderful tree with its precious fruit belonged to Juno, the queen of earth and sky. It had been given to her as a wedding gift, and it was the duty of the maidens to care for it and to see that no one touched the golden apples. Perseus stopped, listened to their song. We sing of the old, we sing of the new. Our joys are many, our sorrows are few. Singing and dancing, all hearts entrancing, we wait to welcome the good and the true. Oh no, it goes on. The daylight is waning, the evening is here. I think I kind of match the music. The sun will soon set, the stars will appear. Singing and dancing, all hearts entrancing, we wait for the dawn of a glad new year. The tree shall wither, apples shall fall. Sorrow shall come and death shall call, alarming and grieving, all hearts deceiving. But hope shall abide to comfort us all. Soon the tale shall be told. The song shall be sung, the bow shall be broken, the harp unstrung, the alarming grieving, all hearts deceiving, till every joy to the winds shall be flung. But a new tree shall spring from the roots of the old, and many a blossom its leaves shall unfold, cheering, gladdening, with joy maddening, for its boughs shall be laden with apples of gold. There we go, best we got. And there he is, Perseus, stopping to listen to the maidens around the tree with the golden apples. By the way, I'm not a musician, so judge accordingly. Then Perseus went forward and spoke to the maidens. They stopped singing and stood still as if in alarm, but when they saw the magic slippers on his feet, they ran to him and welcomed him to the western land and to their garden. "We knew that you were coming," they said, "for the winds told us. But why do you come?" Perseus told them of all that had happened to him since he was a child, and of his quest of Medusa's head. And he said that he had come to ask them to give him 3 things to help him in his fight with the Gorgons. The maidens answered that they would give him not 3 things, but 4. Then one of them gave him a sharp sword, which was crooked like a sickle, and which she fastened to the belt at his waist. And another gave him a shield, which was brighter than any looking glass you ever saw. And the third gave him a magic pouch, which she hung by a long strap over his shoulder. "These are the 3 things which you must have in order to obtain Medusa's head. And now, here is a 4th, for without it your quest must be in vain." And they gave him a magic cap, the cap of darkness. And when they put it upon his head, there was no creature on earth or in the sky, no, not even the maidens themselves, that could see him. When at last he was arraying to their liking, they told him where he would find the Gorgons, and what he should do to obtain the terrible head and escape alive. Then they kissed him and wished him good luck, and bade him hasten to do the dangerous deed. And Perseus donned the cap of darkness and sped away towards the farthermost edge of the earth. And the 3 maidens went back to their tree to sing and to dance and to guard the golden apples until the old world should become young again. Water break. Part 5. The Dreadful Gorgons. With the sharp sword at his side and the bright shield upon his arm, Perseus flew bravely onward in search of the dreadful Gorgons. But he had the cap of darkness upon his head, and you could no more have seen him than you can see the wind. He flew so swiftly that it was not long until he had crossed the mighty ocean which encircles the earth, and had come to the sunless land which lies beyond. And then he knew, from what the maidens had told him, that the lair of the Gorgons could not be far away. He heard a sound as of someone breathing heavily, and he looked around sharply to see where it came from. Among the foul weeds which grew close to the bank of a muddy river, there was something which glittered in the pale light. He flew a little nearer, but he did not dare look straight forward, lest he should all at once meet the gaze of a Gorgon and be changed into stone. So he turned around and held the shining shield before him in such a way that by looking into it, he could see the objects behind him as in a mirror. Ah, what a dreadful sight it was! Half hidden among the weeds lay 3 monsters, fast asleep with their golden wings folded about them. Their brazen claws were stretched out as though ready to seize their prey, and their shoulders were covered with sleeping snakes. The two largest of the Gorgons lay with their heads tucked under their wings as birds hide their faces when they go to sleep. But the third, who lay between them, slept with her face turned towards the sky, and Perseus knew that she was Medusa. Very stealthily he went nearer and nearer, always with his back towards the monsters, and always looking into his bright shield to see where to go. Then he drew his sharp sword, and dashing quickly downward, struck a back blow so sure, so swift, that the head of Medusa was cut from her shoulders, and black blood gushed like a river from her neck. Quick as though he thrust the terrible head into his magic pouch, and leaped again into the air, and flew away with the speed of the wind. Then the two older Gorgons awoke, and rose with dreadful screams, and spread their great wings, and dashed after him. They could not see him, for the cap of darkness had hid him from even their eyes. But they scented the blood of the head which he carried in the pouch. Like hounds in the chase they followed him, sniffing the air, and as he flew through the clouds, he could hear their dreadful cries, and the clatter of their golden wings, and the snapping of their horrible jaws. But the magic slippers were far faster than any wings, and in a little while the monsters were left far behind, and their cries were heard no more, and Perseus flew on alone. The Hat of Darkness, Scorm says, the most metal of haberdashery. Do a constitution check. Part 6. The Great Sea Beast. Perseus soon crossed the ocean and came again to the land of the west. Far below him he could see 3 maidens dancing around the golden tree, but he did not stop, for now that he had the head of Medusa safe in a pouch at his side, he must hasten home. Straight east he flew over the great sea, and after a time he came to a country where there were palm trees and pyramids and a great river flowing from the south. Here, as he looked down, a strange sight met his eyes. He saw a beautiful girl chained to a rock by the seashore. And far away a huge beast swimming towards her to devour her. Quick as thought, he flew down and spoke to her, but as she could not see him for the cap of darkness which he wore, his voice only frightened her. Then Perseus took off his cap and stood upon the rock, and when the girl saw him with his long hair and wonderful eyes and laughing face, she thought him the handsomest young man in the world. "Oh, save me, she cried as she reached out her arms towards him. Perseus drew his sharp sword and cut the chain which held her and lifted her high up on the rock. But by this time the sea monster was close at hand, lashing the water with his tail and opening wide his jaws as though he would swallow not only Perseus and the young girl, but even the rock on which they were standing. He was a terrible fellow, yet not half so terrible as the Gorgon. Why? As he came roaring towards the shore, Perseus lifted the head of Medusa from his pouch and held it up. When the beast saw the dreadful face, he stopped short and was turned into stone, and men say that the stone beast may be seen in that selfsame spot to this day. Then Perseus slipped the Gorgon's head back into the pouch, hastened to speak with the young girl whom he had saved. She told him that her name was Andromeda, and that she was the daughter of the king of that land. She said that her mother, the queen, was very beautiful and very proud of her beauty, and every day she went to the seashore to look at her face as it was pictured in the quiet water. And she had boasted that not even the nymphs who live in the sea were as handsome as she. When the sea nymphs heard about this, they were very angry and asked great Neptune, the king of the sea, to punish the queen for her pride. So Neptune sent a sea monster to crush the king's ship and kill the cattle along the shore and break down all the fishermen's huts. The people were so much distressed that they sent at last to ask the Pythia what they should do. And the Pythia said that there was only one way to save the land from destruction, that they must give the king's daughter to Andromeda, to the monster to be devoured. The king and queen loved their daughter very dearly, for she was their only child, and for a long time they refused to do as the Pythia had told them. But day after day the monster laid waste the land, and threatened to destroy not only the farms, but the towns, and so they were forced in the end to give up Andromeda to save their country. This, then, was why she had been chained to the rock by the shore, and left there to perish in the jaws of the beast. While Perseus was yet talking with Andromeda, the king and the queen and a great company of people came down to shore, weeping and tearing their hair, for they were sure that this time the monster had devoured his prey. But when they saw her alive and well, and learned that she had been saved by this handsome young man who stood beside her, they could hardly hold themselves for joy. And Perseus was so delighted with Andromeda's beauty, he almost forgot his quest, which was not yet finished. And when the king asked him what he should give him as a reward for saving Andromeda's life, he said, "Give her to me for my wife." This pleased the king very much. And so, on the 7th day, Perseus and Andromeda were married, and there was a great feast in the king's palace, and everybody was merry and glad. And the two young people lived happily for some time in the land of palms and pyramids. And from the sea to the mountains nothing was talked about but the courage of Perseus and the beauty of Andromeda. We're not done yet, though. The king saw it and was turned into stone. Wow, that's a revealing title. Part 7, The Timely Rescue. But Perseus had not forgotten his mother. It seems like he might have, just a little bit. And so, one fine summer day, he and Andromeda sailed in a beautiful ship to his own home, for the magic slippers could not carry both him and his bride through the air. The ship came to land at the very spot where the wooden chest had been cast so many years before, and Perseus and his bride walked through the fields towards the town. Now, the wicked king of that land had never ceased trying to persuade... Oh, I was told I pronounced this wrong, but I don't remember. Dana. To become his wife, his mother, anyways. But she would not listen to him. The more he pleaded and threatened, the more she disliked him. At last, when he found out that she could not be made to have him, he declared that he would kill her, and on this very morning he had started out sword in hand to take her life. Red flags. So as Perseus and Andromeda came into town, whom should they meet but his mother fleeing to the altar of Jupiter, and the king following after, intent on killing her. His mother was so frightened that she did not see Perseus, but ran right on towards the only place of safety, for it was a law of that land that not even the king should be allowed to harm anyone who took refuge on the altar of Jupiter. When Perseus saw the king rushing like a madman after his mother, he threw himself before him and bade him to stop, but the king struck at him fiercely with his sword. Perseus caught the blow on his shield, and at that same moment took the head of Medusa from his magic pouch. "I promised to bring you a present, and here it is," he cried. The king saw it, and was turned into stone, just as he stood, with his sword uplifted and that terrible look of anger and passion in his face. The people of the island were glad when they learned what had happened, for no one loved the wicked king. They were glad too because Perseus had come home again, and had brought with him his beautiful wife, Andromeda. So after they talked the matter over among themselves, they went to him and asked him to be their king. But he thanked them and said that he would rule over them for 1 day only, and then he would give the kingdom to another, so that he might take his mother back to her home and her kindred in distant Argos. On the morrow, therefore, he gave the kingdom to the kind man who had saved his mother and himself from the sea. Then he went on board his ship, with Andromeda and his mother and sailed away across the sea towards Argos. And the deadly quait? I genuinely have not encountered that word. In case you're wondering, normally I do pre-read these, but seeing as I started this by not pre-reading it, for some reason it felt right to just try it again. In the future, I will do my homework. Suki says, Danae. Okay. When Danae's old father, the king of Argos, heard that a strange ship was coming over the sea with his daughter and her son on board, he was in great distress, as he should be, for he remembered what the Pythia had foretold about his death. So without waiting to see the vessel, he left his palace in great haste and fled out of the country. "My daughter's son cannot kill me if I will keep out of his way," he said. But Perseus had no wish to harm him, and he was very sad when he learned that his poor grandfather had gone away in fear without telling anyone where he was going. The people of Argos welcomed Danae to her old home, and they were very proud of her handsome son and begged that he would stay in the city so that he might sometime become their king. It happened soon afterwards that the king of a certain country not far away was holding games and giving prizes to the best runners and leapers and quoit throwers. Anyone want to Google that? Because I don't know what that is. And Perseus went hither to try his strength with the other men of the land. For if he should be able to gain a prize, his name would become known all over the world. No one in that country knew who he was, but all wondered at his noble stature and his strength and skill, and it was easy enough for him to win all the prizes. One day, as he was showing what he could do, he threw a heavy quoit a great deal farther than any had been thrown before. It fell in the crowd of lookers-on, and struck a stranger who was standing there. The stranger threw up his hands and sank upon the ground, and when Perseus ran to help him, he saw that he was dead. Now this man was none other than Danae's father, the old king of Argos. He had fled from his kingdom to save his life, and in doing so had only met his death. Perseus was overcome with grief and tried in every way to pay honor to the memory of the unhappy king. The kingdom of Argos was now rightfully his own, but he could not bear to take it after having killed his grandfather. So he was glad to exchange with another king who ruled over 2 rich cities not far away, called Mycenae and Tiryns, and he and Andromeda lived happily in Mycenae for many years. I know how to say that. I don't know why I'm blanking on it. I believe that is the end of our story. Scorm says, quoit is a ring of iron, rope, or rubber thrown in a game to encircle or land as near as possible to an upright peg. So it's basically horseshoes. I wonder if it's the origin of the shot put, because I think that does come from the original Greek games. Maybe that's what they're referencing. Because it wouldn't make sense that he would throw it as far as possible if he had a target to hit, right? That wouldn't show the greatness of Perseus. Well, we ran again a little short. I'm on an off measure, which means we once again have a choice. Do I again, like I'm pretty loose in the summer, because I'm sure you've noticed not a lot of people are tuning in to watch Fireside Fairytales in the middle of August, especially after a pandemic. So I'm welcome to read whatever it is folks are interested in. I could tell you a little bit of Scorm. Oh, I love that you asked this. So, you say, so Medusa died for no reason. So, here is something that I find very interesting, that I mentioned how unqualified I am to be doing this in any intellectual way. However, this is something I can add to. So, my degree was in philosophy and psychology, but philosophy is what matters here. And philosophy pulls a lot from Greek myth to make observations on society. And there's this idea that comes in old myths that we've seen with Norse and we've seen with Greek. I'm sure it's not in all old styles of myth, but in a lot. That sort of outward beauty and strength is a mark of good. I don't think we have that kind of thinking now. And you even see that fade in Athens with the Hellenistic era, moving away from sort of the idealistic sculptures of people, and that's what we yearn for, which I think is around the time when Perseus would have been wrought as a tale, into Hellenistic, which was just sort of sculpting the battered and bruised sides of society and the underbellies, the average person, if you will. So obviously it is a general trend. But we're still in the kind of mode here where beauty reveals inner goodness. And you see a lot of that actually in Lord of the Rings, because he's pulling from that too. You know, the great, noble, do-everything person. And the reason why that is important is really to sort of uphold the idea of why do kings get to rule. So Suki says, I have this great story from Herodotus about giant gold digging ants that's not too long. I do know that story. I'll mention that in a moment. Who Herodotus is and what the giant gold digging ants probably were. So there's this idea of like a higher type of person, and I think it probably harkens back to the ideas of certain lineages being more connected to the gods, or at least races like created by the gods. And of course, every culture, their race is the race created by a god at this time. You know, you get the chosen people in the Old Testament being Jewish tribes. You get the Norse see themselves as descendants in a line opposite of, giants who are distorted. But what it means is that there is this equivalency that if you are an ugly, horrible, twisted creature on the outside, you must be on the inside. And so the reason why I think this poem feels no need to give reason to kill a Gorgon is it's just obvious. Why would anything that looks so unlike the ideal human, our kings or whatever else, why would they not be evil? And I think if you do assign to an idea of these grand lineages and there's evil and good or powerful figures in that history like Jupiter and whatever else, that they probably come from a cursed lineage, right? So in our terms, we're used to like, don't judge a book by a cover. Who are they? Should we trust them? But in old world terms, I think it's enough to say that they aren't. They don't look like the old statues of ideal people, and therefore, why wouldn't you? And obviously, without going too deep into it, that is an ideology that creates an enormous amount of problems in history. When you have, especially two different groups that have two different, figureheads in the cosmos who say that they are the people who are chosen, right? So very quickly, Herodotus was essentially a traveler who came out of Athens, and he would go to lands and then did like travel journals, really. in a much grander scale, and obviously is a lot harder to travel at that time. And he would come back and he would tell Athenians about what he found. And at one point he had a writing where he went, I forget where it was. I think it was determined to be like east of Turkey or something like that. But anyways, he describes these giant gold digging ants. For many years, it was just sort of like, you know, he was kind of making stuff up, trying to make a good story, which definitely happened. However, I think the general agreement now is that he was probably talking about, and I'm probably going to get the species wrong, but you'll get the idea. I think it was groundhogs or something like that. Because what context would he have for what they were? Other than, you know, living down on a rocky shoreline in Greece. He didn't have a lot of context for these things. He hadn't seen mammals that burrowed into the ground. Only ants and other bugs did that, so he just took them to be giant ants. Scorm says more like the father of misinformation. Well, I mean, if you want to be cynical about it, folk tales and things we're reading are very heavily political propaganda by royal families. A great deal of like Roman mythology is basically just justifying why the emperors got to rule everybody in an unquestioned way. Greece is a little more wishy-washy about that. But, you know, the whole mythos about the start of Rome and the brothers at the gate and all that. Marmots, that's right. Marmots. Thank you, Suki. Well, okay. So I killed 10 minutes talking about nothing. Which is probably what I'm best at. I want to see something here. We've been talking about these gods. I think I might want to read you a little summary of the gods. Jupiter, because this basically picks up with Jupiter. It's very short. We'll sort of call it on that. But it'll give you a little bit of background on the characters. Jupiter and his mighty company. A long time ago, when the world was much younger than it is now, people told and believed a great many wonderful stories about wonderful things, which neither you nor I have ever seen. Now, I should say, keep in mind that this was translated in, like, Victorian era, maybe later than that. So, it's a little mixed as to how much this is written for the audience that just started the book by the translator, and how much of this is actually taken from text. They often talked about a certain mighty being called Jupiter, or Zeus, who was the king of the sky and the earth. We'll come back to that, as to why there's a Jupiter-Zeus confusion. And they said that he sat most of the time amid the clouds on the top of a very high mountain, where he could look down and see everything that was going on in the earth beneath. He liked to ride on the storm clouds and hurl burning thunderbolts right and left among the trees and rocks, and he was so very, very mighty that when he nodded, the earth quaked, the mountains trembled and smoked, and the sky grew black and sun hid his face. Jupiter had 2 brothers, both of them terrible fellows, but not nearly so great as himself. The name of one was Neptune, or Poseidon, and he was the king of the sea. He had a glittering golden palace far down in the deep sea caves where the fishes lived and the red coral grows. And whenever he was angry, the waves would rise mountain high and the storm winds would howl fearfully and the sea would break over the land. The men called him the Shaker of the Earth. The other brother of Jupiter was a sad, pale-faced being whose kingdom was underneath the earth, where the sun never shone, and where there was darkness and weeping and sorrow all the time. His name was Pluto, or Adonis. Idionus. Jesus. And his country was called the Lower World, or the Land of the Shadows, or Hades. Men said that whenever anyone died, Pluto would send his messenger, or shadow leader, to carry that one down into his cheerless kingdom. And for that reason, they never spoke well of him, but thought of him only as the enemy of life. A great number of other mighty beings lived with Jupiter amid the clouds on the mountaintop. So many that I can name a very few only. There was Venus, the queen of love and beauty, who was fairer by far than any woman that you or I have seen. There was Athena, or Minerva, the queen of the air, who gave people wisdom and taught them how to do very many useful things. There was Juno, the queen of the earth and sky, who sat at the right hand of Jupiter and gave him all kinds of advice. There was Mars, the great warrior, whose delight was in the din of battle. There was Mercury, the swift messenger, who had wings on his caps and shoes, who flew from place to place like the summer clouds when they are driven before the wind. There was Vulcan, a skilled blacksmith, who had his forge in a burning mountain and wrought many wonderful things of iron and copper and gold. And besides these, there were many others about whom you will learn by and by, and about whom men told strange and beautiful stories. They lived in glittering gold mansions high up among the clouds, so high indeed that the eyes of men could never see them. But they could look down and see what the men were doing, and oftentimes they were said to leave their lofty homes and wander unknown across the land or over the sea. And of all these mighty folk, Jupiter was by far the mightiest. So, before we wrap up, why does every god have two names? It's not nearly as mythological a reason as you'd probably hope. The answer, as I understand it, now, I'm not great at art history, so anybody can correct me in chat. I did do some of it. I wasn't very good at it. The answer is basically the Romans did that, as I understand it. Because the Romans crushed the Greeks for a while there. And but then came to kind of romanticize Athenian culture, and made a lot of like copies of their statues and so on, and even copied parts of their pantheon of gods, but they gave them distinctly Roman names, which are things like Jupiter and Mercury and so on. Scorm says the Romans stole Greek history. Yeah, I mean, if you want to know the tale of the West in pretty much, I mean, recorded history, I think probably the earliest we get is Assyrians. And depending on who you're talking to, then it's kind of like Hebrew and Egyptian. So like around 10,000 years, I think, is probably like the most recorded history we can track. Maybe even less than that. But the story in that time in the West, in that area, was basically a bunch of imperialist kings sacking each other and becoming the next big thing in town for a few centuries. And some lasted longer than others, but each time they did, they took pieces of culture with them. And sometimes they were more clear on their acknowledgement of it, like Romans with the Greeks, and sometimes they were not. Yeah, so there was a lot of that. I should also add that during this entire time, the Romans were running things there for the first time anyways, after sort of the fall of Athens and that. There's a whole nother history going on in the north that eventually leads to, England and France. And I think you might be surprised to know that the supposed original tale of King Arthur, which is debated as to whether he existed, would have taken place around, I think it was 500 AD. It was a tale that was just sort of kept alive and then was embraced by kings about 600 years later. That would mean that he was basically just kind of a barbarian in the north as far as the Romans were concerned. So, this is probably not that interesting. So, and to be honest, there's a very good chance there's a lot of inaccuracies in that because history is not my strong suit. At least this kind of history anyways. So, use your Wikipedia pages or contact more knowledgeable and equipped friends to confirm any of this. But there you go. There's the story of Medusa, who plays a very small part in the story, but is I think such a distinct character. That's why we all remember it. It's really the story of Perseus, doing many wonderful things and then returning to rule with his wife Andromeda. Now you know the origins and some names, and a little bit about the gods in the sky. The other thing I guess I will add is this is an old book, and some of these understandings of that mythology and the writings we have, I don't think were known at the time it was written. So I wouldn't take this as science facts or cutting-edge history. Well, before I bleed off more viewers, I guess I will wrap things up. I will say that tomorrow there will be another book recommendation from Avalon. If you didn't see hers last week, it's called Lazy Book Recommendations. I think you should check it out. It's only about 2 minutes. And then on Thursday, I'll be back with a new light game and maybe a guest. We'll see who I can talk into it. But for now, why don't you cozy up on the couch, pretend it's cold outside, and have yourself a wonderful sleep. Thank you very much for coming by, and I hope to see you again next week at 6:30.